Welcome to the new Breadcrumbs webinar. Very excited to introduce you our next speaker, Dave Shanley, the CEO and founder of Content Camel. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Hey, how's it going, Armando?
I'm really good. Very excited for this session that we're going to have. I'm also going to close the window. I'm in New York, so there is a lot of
I thought they were shooting the horns for you, man. I thought it was it was,
No, that
it
was
was
like
incredible.
random truck passing through. I just realized that, I should have closed the windows. I'll do it right now. But the stage is yours. It's not them, it's you, driving urgency in marketing and sales. Let's go.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody. So a little bit of background. I'm sort of a unique animal where I actually made the transition from CTO, like technical founder, over eventually to growth marketer through my experience. And that's really just fundamentally based on the fact that I realized that, to be truly successful, you have to really deeply understand go-to-market. And if you have awesome go-to-market and a kind of a mediocre or like maybe not even so good product, you can be successful. If you have an amazing product, amazing service, and you have lousy go-to-market, then you're going to suffer. And so through, and I like to say, I've gone from my couch, like literally couch founder, to public company executive through building, growing companies and exiting. And there's an IPO in there, sold another company, ultimately was rolled up into a private equity sale. And I've been around and working with teams and experienced like sustained 50% year over year growth, doubled ACVs, kind of all those things. And so that's my perspective. Like that's where I'm coming from. And I think about this stuff literally all day, every day, and just want to share with everybody here what rattles around in my head. And right now, I'm the founder and CEO of Content Camel, and we are marketing and sales content management platform. And so basically, marketers are really frustrated that they're producing great content that's not going to be getting used by the sales team. And the sales team is frustrated that they can't find the stuff they need to move deals along. We think everything's content. It's sort of everything that you can offsite, onsite, testimonials, everything is really helps drive what we're going to talk about here, urgency in deals. And so we help manage that. So that's what we do at Content Camel. But yeah, so what I hope that you get out of this today is like a refresh of your thinking. Like, how do you bring that to both in your work and what your teams are doing? Kind of a fresh way of thinking about this, so that obviously you can just move faster and be more successful. It is about conversion. How can we drive that? How can we drive momentum? And ultimately, do you have like some tactical things, right? Because there's sort of, I think of like big picture strategy, but ultimately it ends up really like hands on keyboard. What are you actually going to do? So we're going to go through some examples and things like that to dig in. So right off the top, I just want to like the kind of refresh your thinking. Nerds talk about this all the time, and I haven't really heard marketers talk about this, but it's this idea of like first principles. How do we know what we know? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? And do we know from like the fundamental building blocks of like what we're trying to accomplish? I think this is really interesting because from a systems building standpoint, for you and your teams, are you capturing this kind of understanding, or are a lot of people just, that you're working with, like falling into mimicking, like, hey, this company, this competitor, this adjacent company, this big brand is doing this. And so we're kind of going to go mimic that and do that. But you're doing that without really understanding, is it working? Why are we doing that? Right? And what are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve from that? And so like the big, like the real deep, like outcomes, not necessarily like KPIs, like we want this click-through rate and this conversion rate and things like that. Those are like micro things after you've already decided on what you're going to do. This is more about, do we fundamentally understand what it is that we are looking to accomplish? And how do we know that, right? And so my first principles takeaways from doing this for like a decade and a half, relentlessly thinking about go to market, is that in marketing and sales, like driving urgency is everything, right? So what does that mean? The takeaways from that are messaging is way more important than brand. A lot of people, it's almost like, from my perspective, like brand's like a crutch or something, and people think that they've got to mimic like big brands and have the brand one-liners, and they've got to rebrand, and they have to, you know, just, you know, brand marketing and brand placement and all this other stuff. But like, if you really think about it, if you strip all the things back, I think of brand as just a container of all the messaging, all the work, all the execution that you and your team and the organization has done and put into that container, and it's a proxy for that. And so big brands get to do it, and they get away with it, and it may not even be the best from first principle standpoint. It may not even be the actual best approach that they can take, but they get away with it because they have built that container. Their brands are well known and they mean something. But from basically all the rest of us, you know, if we're not a sort of F100 kind of brand, or F500 brand, then it's really about messaging. It's, when you strip it down from a first principle standpoint, it's about connecting with like literally an individual. You know, I like to say that, you know, teams don't gather around, like your buyers in a group don't gather around like reading your blog posts in a conference room, right? No one's browsing LinkedIn together. It's like literally one-to-one connections, like one-to-one relationships and interactions. And like, what does that look like? And if you strip it back and start with that context, how does that refresh your thinking? Also, I mean, I think we all know this, but there's no convincing a buyer, right? So you're not educating them, you're not convincing them. There's like, you could just, that is off the table. And so what does that actually mean to drive urgency in that context? It means that you are reshuffling a buyer's priority. Like, you are distracting them and bumping something up, and we're going to talk more about that. And then triggers are what happens. There's a reason for everything. Somebody makes a decision, and there's a reason behind that. And so how can you tap in to their trigger points and fundamentally understand that? And then from a system standpoint, are you documenting that in your team? Like, literally, are you writing it down? What is motivating folks? And I think that's what a lot is missing from the typical persona messaging, where it's like psychographic, or, you know, you put up these fun little generalized pictures and generalized, you know, kind of stereotypical, you know, profiles or whatever, but it misses this fundamental part of what context are they living in, and what is going to trigger them. And then we'll also talk about like lowering the buying friction. So marketing doesn't have necessarily a ton of levers on this, as far as like, you know, product or service or pricing or things like that, but we all have a lot of influence over the actual buying journey. But like, you know, what are they doing as far as next steps, barriers to that, and everything along those lines. So that's what I unpack from like a first principles takeaway of like, it really is about momentum, urgency, driving that. And we're going to pick apart some of the things around messaging and triggers, right here. So for messaging, again, I mentioned that it's not like the brand one-liners, but it's also, you go to a lot of sort of messaging templates and things like that, and they talk about like value props, and you get the whole team talking about, you know, the benefits and all that your product delivers. And from what I want you all to think about is just, if you can articulate the whys, and you keep like unpacking the whys, like why do they care about it? Why does your audience care about that? Right? And you can have multiple personas at play, and you need to run through this exercise for each individual one. And I would say, make it pain based. And then pain, what does pain actually mean? If you unpack that, it's really frustrations and fears. I honestly think this is what it boils down to 100% of the time, both in like your own personal life. If you look out for this, why am I making these decisions? Why am I buying a new car, new shoes, right? Anything that you're doing, it's to avoid frustration and avoid fear. You can create a message and a narrative around that for basically everything. And that speaks to their current state or their past state, and motivating them to recognize that you actually understand where they're coming from, and that they're going to like kind of like lean in and they're open to receive the message. So if you think of this from a system standpoint, how can we take that frustration and that fear-based perspective and make sure it's woven in to everything that we're doing? And so it's like, obviously blog copy, any leave behind collateral, videos. It can all start off with that narrative that's targeted at your buyer, and definitely in sales conversations, right? Like down funnel, it's positioning and messaging for that narrative that is avoid this frustration, avoid this fear. And then you can get into kind of the benefit conversation by gaining something. Too many times it's just positioned only as benefits, and we sort of again mimic what other folks are doing, and we think that's the right play, but then it doesn't motivate anybody, and we're putting friction in place of that conversion event, because they have to like extrapolate the message. They have to say like, okay, I'm receiving this benefit message, but now I'm thinking about like, I have to map that to my internal use case, and like, why do I care, right? And too often you're just going to get bounced, or it's like a false signal, and it doesn't drive urgency. So easy process is to flip all those narratives and like rewrite them in this frustration and fear-based way, and show the gap of their distance away from that end state. The other thing is, I have this mental picture of everybody's busy, right? Everybody's super busy, and they have, I think of this like mental checklist that they have, or priority list that they've got in their head. So your buyer, like that one-to-one relationship, the person that's going to be the entry point for a deal starting off or moving a deal down the pipeline, they have this priority list of all these things, and stuff gets added to it like every day, and it might pop up to the top, and it might, add on to the bottom. And your message is probably hitting them if it's like the first time that they're engaging with you as an organization, right? Your message is probably hitting them as a distraction, an ad on LinkedIn, or even a search result, right? If I'm searching for something, and then it's injection into the search stream, it may or may not be what they are looking for at that particular moment. But if you take the stance that you're not convincing them of anything, and you're not educating them of anything, that you want to attract and convert the audience that already has this set of problems, it's on their checklist. Okay. It's probably not the top thing currently on their checklist, but how do you re-trigger them? How do you remind them that they have this problem and that it's not solved? That's the kind of key to putting yourself, like, again, like popping it up to the top of the list, and then you get the opportunity then to engage and follow through with all the other pieces. You earn the right to obviously distract them and move them down the way that you want to have them, convert and follow kind of the flow. And so it's, without that, it's just noise, right? It's just noise, because it's really hard to gauge if it's like relevant to them or things like that from the marketer side. So if we look at an example of like fear, frustration, or just like high level messaging, I pulled in this example, not related, like no relation to Dooley, the product, but it's in the sales space, right? And it's on the left-hand side, we've got the messaging that sort of like lost its way. It's all benefit messaging. If you check this out, like guide sellers to close one, okay, that's sort of really vanilla. And then it's just, you're going to win more, and you're gonna, you're gonna improve hygiene and eliminate low value work. Like if you think about it from an executive buyer standpoint, how does that tap into frustration? How does that tap into fear? Like I'm, maybe a little bit on the hygiene thing, although it's weird sort of nomenclature, or like it's not plain language, but it's like, yeah, everybody wants to win more. I mean, it's just not like, it's not visceral, right? It's not visceral at all. And it's very typical of like this high level kind of messaging that you see everywhere, right? On the right hand side, they've found their way. And the interesting thing, I think, with them, if you pay attention, they sort of, were really super on point with messaging, lost their way, found their way. On the right hand side, it's still gain messaging, make every rep a top performer. Okay, the flip side is like, avoid your reps like falling behind, right? And then, but it's very specific. It's like confident in your forecast and hit revenue goals, right? And so there's like, again, that's gain messaging. So there's the flip side, but there is a natural like flip side where, hey, I'm worried, like as a sales executive, like I'm worried about that we're gonna, not meet our revenue goals, and then my forecast is like wishful thinking. It's very, very specific. It's like a very specific scenario. So if this message receives, if this message interrupts me, I see this on LinkedIn or something like this, it's like those people that it wants to pull in. It's speaking to an exact context that I'm operating in. Am I worried about my forecast before I saw this message? Am I worried about the revenue goals before this hit me? Yes, but it's like maybe I'm dealing with something else, right? Maybe we're dealing with like a Salesforce migration or something like that, and that's like top of mind. But this is going to bubble this up because they've got like try Dooley for free. It's like there's the low friction starting point. And so from a fresh thinking perspective, how do we look at what we've got? And it's like everything that we've got, all those initial touch points, and kind of recraft them in this much more visceral, motivating messaging way. The other thing is they are super on point. If you look at, they address different personas, and they're super on point with the individual rep messaging, right? It's like, again, it's gain, freedom to sell, whatever. But it's like, stop working overtime, keep your manager off your back. I mean, that is like really specific and very clear. It's not high level foofy brand messaging. It's like super duper on point. I'm working overtime. It's really frustrating. My manager's on my back about getting stuff into Salesforce. It's really frustrating. Or I'm afraid my manager is going to bug me, or be watching me, or I'm a new rep, all this stuff. So it's like that is exactly the play and the tune-up that you want to do across the board. And giving your sales reps the ability to message this for your products and services, the way to, again, like create that urgency and immediately get that buy-in. It should resonate with buyers, both in the market when they engage with your marketing materials, and through the sales process. And this kind of leads to a formula. This is how I think about it. I'm a backgrounds engineer. Formula is great. This is like how it like all boils down to. If they've got this checklist in their brain, right? Your prospect has all these things going on. Is there the sum of their frustrations and fears greater than the friction of doing something, or doing nothing, taking action, plus the cost? Right? If they're really afraid, like something's really bad going to happen, they are going to suffer. They're going to engage with high cost, high friction. Right? If you're asking them to do something that is on their list that they have a small frustration about, but if you give them what I call the easy button, low friction, low cost, they'll take action. That's kind of the interesting thing. That gets you away from like education. Well, we're educating the audience and they just don't seem to get it. Like they just don't seem to see like all these benefits that we're providing, and it's not getting through. It's because you're not on the list. Like it's like not on their priority list. You're messaging it the wrong way. You're telling that narrative the wrong way. Or high friction, high cost. Something's out of whack. What we can do as marketers is that obviously we can tackle the left side, right? nail the frustration and fear messaging, and we can work within the bounds of like lowering the friction, lowering like, don't make me jump through a bunch of hoops to get the information I need, right? Don't, just easing the process at all the different areas, right? It's interesting, like, yeah, it's interesting in B2B, right? We hide a ton of information from buyers. We make it very, very hard to buy, honestly. And from a first principle standpoint, why do we do that? Why are we doing that, right? Why don't we ask the top 10 questions? Why don't we ask and answer the top 10 questions in the sales process? Why is marketing not, why are we as a team not working closely with sales? Document the top 10, 20 questions and just outright answer them. Make sure that that's front and center, because people that are evaluating that, that's what they care about. Yeah, so in practice, from a systems building standpoint, is everybody on your team sort of speaking the voice of the customer? And how do we do that? Is it clear who the audience is every time, right? Can we articulate their context? Where are we that we can re-trigger them by telling them that story? And again, is everything reframed based on frustrations and fears and reducing the friction? Are we demonstrating that they're going to avoid their frustrations, avoid their fears, gain benefits directly related to that? And are we giving them the easy button, communicating to them that we're giving them the easy button? Those are really the keys. And I think, again, like in practice, one simple thing is, this is like a pet peeve of mine, like, or like an area that's like so obvious that folks get wrong, like all the time, and it's really down funnel, is our case studies. So many times, I mean, this is like a HubSpot case study. It is a lot of fluff language and like navel gazing, like inside baseball, inside HubSpot kind of talk, like 100%, 180% deal generation growth, right, through smarter prospecting. It's like that speaks to nobody's frustration, nobody's fears. Like it's the high friction, like you have to jump through so many hoops to figure out how does that like relate to me, you know what I mean? And it goes down all of these things. So like this area, like prospecting roadblocks, right? An unclear view of customers. That's like a little bit closer, but it's like way buried. The things that you can do today is like go through all of your case studies and reframe them and really highlight the customer story, because that's fundamentally like what is driving the people's does this relate to me? Am I open and going to receive this message? And then as you're producing case studies, you can do simple things like make sure that the quote, like the pull quote from the customer, is not just brand jargon or random stuff that they're characterizing, but you can actually like, are they articulating the state that they were in before and like the deep frustrations and fears that they had? Like you could, by knowing this ahead of time and coming in, you can actually architect all of the execution so that you get the results you want, so that each piece highlights the narrative and the way that's going to resonate with the audience, versus simply words on a page that seem to look good from a marketing standpoint, that are in line with what you want to communicate, but are actually not in line with what the prospect wants to receive. So anyway, that's like a really, really straightforward, simple area to execute on. And I think we're going to open it up for questions now and dive into some more details. I added like a little microsite, and so it's got like, if you go to that driving urgency webinar link, there's the resources I mentioned on first principles, a couple templates on messaging, product messaging, an overview of Content Camel. Yeah.
Awesome, Dave. Love it. Particularly love the as versus them, right? Like most people, when they think about their world, they tend to focus on the things that they care about versus the things that their prospects and customers care about.
Yeah.
And so that's a very clear message. And the
And
second,
it's yeah, and it's like the interesting thing is it's it's just an easy place to slide to, right? It's not that they're sitting around, that everybody on the team is sitting around thinking like, we just want to focus on us. It's easy to sort of slide into that if you don't put these systems in place.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it happens in startup. I mean, so I've started over like a couple times and built companies from the ground up. So it's like really hard, and it's hard when you're little, and it's honest to God. I've been on big teams where you have dozens of people,
Yeah.
on the marketing side, and hundreds of people like selling and stuff like that. And it's still hard then.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's honestly, it comes down to like super tactical, the same stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that was a kind of a strong takeaway for me, which I think it's spot on, and people should take notes on it, is the fact that there is always a to-do list, right? Like
Yes.
in the mind of the prospect. And so order of business number one is, are you on that to-do list or not? And then order of business number two, on top of the to-do list, there's always a top three, right? Yeah. And the top three gets done. And everything that is not top three is kind of a problem for later, not a problem for now. And so not only are you on that to-do list, but are you on the top three, or how can you get into the top three? And then the following order of business is not only the great job if you were able to get into that top three, but how do you stay there, right? Because the top three constantly shifts and changes, and there is stuff that gets added to people's plate all the time.
Yep. So the trick there, it's really interesting. One, if you're not on the list, disqualified.
Right.
You will not get on that list.
Right.
Because it's just like you don't have the right to get, you haven't earned the right to get on that list. So if you're not on the list, that's a classic, like, they're disqualified. Don't chase it. Don't chase it from sales. Don't chase it from marketing. If when you know you're on the list, because you do know, because you feel pulled from a marketing standpoint.
How do you know?
Because you've had enough conversations.
Right.
Either the organization has evolved and it's mature enough, or whatever, or if you're going into a new area, somebody has done the discovered conversations and come back with learnings, and you hear it. You hear it. There's pull.
Yeah, you hear it. I find that people will tell you, like, hey, this is a priority for me, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're like, there's pull, right? So you're on the list, and you can figure out who are these people, what's common about them, all of that, right? That's essentially like your persona. That's your way. That's the way in. You re-trigger them. So to get into the top three, to bump it up, is like you re-trigger them. You remind them, like, hey, I bet this is a big issue, right? I bet this is a big issue for you, because you know that type of person. You've done that upfront work, and it'll resonate with them, and they'll be like, yes, that is an issue for us. And then the next piece is easy button.
Right. How do you make it easy for them to move forward the next steps that you need?
Exactly. And it's not the next steps that like you want. It's like, how do you paint a picture that's easy for them to get it off their list?
So, how do you get them to that promised land?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
What if you are priority number 4?
I still think it's the same thing. I think you just re-trigger them, and you're like, hey, I bet this is a real pain in the butt for you. We've got like a super easy way, to take action.
Okay.
I mean, just fundamentally, I think as individuals, we're all interrupt driven. And if I can get something done that's a win, and and I can get it done now, and it's perceived to be simple and straightforward, right? The easy button, then you can shift that up. And then you ask, like, how do you stay there? The interesting thing is you get them to acknowledge, you use their words, because people are like, conceptually, we are locked into like consistency. We don't like to invalidate our own consistency.
Right.
So that's the whole like sales thing, where you get the agreement and all that, right? And so if you can get them, but we can do that in marketing too, right? It's sort of like, hey, you said this was important to you, and then you just repeat back to them the words that they're probably using. Right.
Yeah. A couple of questions from the audience. So, Priscilla, how to use urgency without sounding too negative?
Um, it's so you can. I think you can dial this up to an 11. I think you actually can dial this up to an 11. With the loss avoidance language, like basically avoid these frustrations, avoid these fears. We could go back to the Dooley example, and we can, they're like basically keep your manager off your back, right? It's
Right.
sort of, you can, if you resonate, if you're going after the right audience, and this is something that you either think they have an issue with, or right? So that translates whether like it's an experiment or just execution, then I think you can dial it up to an 11.
Yeah,
right. Without being sort of like if it's authentic, right? And I get however you define authentic, but
I think to me, and I resonate with very much with what you're saying right now. It comes down to, are you helping them achieve an outcome they're looking for?
Yeah.
If that is true, then you are an enabler in that sense, and it's in their best interest as well as in yours to go as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, which is, again, from a first principle standpoint, that's what it's all about, right? And then it's just tapping into really direct language around what they're afraid of,
right,
and what they're frustrated by.
And if that is not the case, then you need to go back to why that is not the case.
Exactly.
And what is in the way? Is that priority number 4, priority number 5? Is that the budget issue? Is that process issue? Is there some gap from a product point of view, from an internal buying point of view? Who's the buying committee? Who needs to be on board with this? Understand, again, going back to them versus us. The mechanics of how they make buying decisions, and the things that they care about, definition of success. There is something.
And the great part, so you're hitting on things, those are all down funnel things. So those are late stage, where you talk about the paper process, buying, and driving urgency through there. The cool thing is from a system standpoint, you want to make sure that you're replaying the fear and frustration loop for everybody, because it's different.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, different stakeholders and people
they have different fears and frustrations. And so the one way to kill urgency and slow everything down is to not replay that loop.
Right.
To basically go in with a message that resonated with your sort of champion, the inroad, the initial, evaluator, or someone that pulled you in, right? Is to just take what resonated with them and try to run that through the whole process. This is actually it's an iterative loop. Are you replaying and reflecting back to them what you heard? Is really transactional. It's literally, this is what we heard. This is what's frustrating. This is what you seem to be afraid of. Does that resonate? What would you add to that list? And it's all open-ended questions. It's what would you add to that list?
Yeah. And are they behaving consistently with what they're saying or not? If not, that there may be something that you didn't uncover just yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Jess, any tips on how a solo entrepreneur can figure out if they are on the list of priorities of their targeted customers or prospect in this case? We don't have a whole team gathering info and compiling data.
Just have a ton of conversations. You don't need that many. I mean, it's I think if you have 10 conversations, you'll see patterns, right? I mean, as a solo entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, or even, solo marketer, you have a thesis, right? You have a hypothesis that hey, I think they're frustrated by this. And if you can document that, then you can have conversations around that. And it literally is as straightforward as reaching out to folks that you would want to attract from a prospect sales process, and just say, hey, basically I would say, hey, I think this resonates. You know what I mean? We've talked to other folks and they seem to care about this.
Or, hey, I think that this is important for you.
Exactly.
That. Yeah.
Exactly. I think this is important for you. Is that the case? And if not, in the zone, what is?
Right.
People will tell you.
Yeah. And the other thing is that you don't need a whole team. I think my reaction to this is that you don't need the whole team to do a lot of groundwork. You just need to get to the first 5 to 10 close one, and you will see very quickly that patterns emerge.
Yeah, you don't even need, you don't, honestly, you could start way up funnel. And I would say you don't even need to get to close one. You just need to get to, I'm responding to you,
The stuff
right?
fair, very fair. The stuff that's moving, yes, very fair, very fair.
Because if you can, you know, it might take, I don't know,
If
depending
people
on what you're trying to
don't
sell, it might
believe
take
it, clearly not
hundred,
there.
it might take 100 deals to get to close one or something. I don't know. But the whole trick is everything starts at funnel. You're basically, again, like if we think we're distracting them, if we understand we're
Yes.
distracting them, and the whole game is not education, and it's not putting something on their list. It's just resonating with them,
Yeah.
and diverting their attention and having them lean in.
Will they even talk to you? Will they even give you 30 minutes of their time?
Yeah. And believe me, they will if it's on their list and you can re-trigger them.
Yes.
They will.
Yes.
They will.
One more comment from Jess. I like this. It sounds like the way to drive urgency without sounding too negative is by focusing on the fears/frustrations in a way that shows you get it. Yes, that is framed more as against them, the world, the problem.
Yeah. So now armed with this information, if you look at your own materials, if you go out in the world and look at how, blog posts are written and things like that, there is so much that drops into like education. Like I call it like this third person thing where marketing teams typically are like talking about the audience they want to connect with in this weird disembodied like third person. Right. It is so weird. I just find it like so weird because it's, if we're going after sales leaders, I don't ever want to see a piece of content that's like sales leaders say, you know what I mean? Or, most sales organizations choose blah, 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 or like, you know what I mean? It's like really weird. It's like, who are you talking about? Or who are you talking to? Are you talking to an analyst? Is this like a Wikipedia entry? It's like, it should be, hey, we get you. Right?
Yeah. So one more, like a bunch of more questions actually that people submitted before we started. Can you share insights into how to discover customer pain points when you're not able to get them into a discovery conversation?
Yeah, that was a really good question. Because, when you're like, say, like an individual contributor on a marketing team, it's not like people are shoveling customer contacts over to you necessarily. There's lots of things that you can do. One, honestly, I think like Reddit, Twitter, online searching, just where people are talking. Like if you just stop and look at the opportunity space of like, where is my audience engaging, right? It could be on a Slack, it could be on Discord, like, like a community somewhere. Yeah. And then dig in, like, are they talking about this topic? How are they talking about this topic? Like you will find some pretty amazing stuff, like LinkedIn, obviously. And then also internally, can you do a search on, like notes in Salesforce, or, do you have like recorded calls or things like that you can review and look for these specific, trigger words, things that they seem to indicate that they care about this area and how they're positioned on it. You can also, honestly, like if you're an individual contributor, right, on a marketing team, and you don't necessarily, like, you can't communicate, say, directly with like customers, or you don't have necessarily access, you can still post on social media, prompting with open-ended prompts like, hey, this is probably hard for you, being like this group, how do you handle it, right? Like, how do you approach it?
And if it's really, really impossible to get them on a discovery conversation, would you agree that that means that it's not on their priority list?
If you can or can?
If you cannot.
If you cannot, yeah. But people, but honestly, like if you post it on Reddit or whatever, right, or Twitter or whatever, like, hey, this is probably hard for.
Then we talk to you if it's,
Some people will say like, no, it's not. We just, it's super simple. You just do this, right? And you can kind of gather up those objections, and maybe you can handle those objections. But yeah, it's probably not on their list. Yeah.
Another question, how do you utilize ICP and buyer's persona? How do you make sure those are always on point?
Yeah, I mean, it is that cycle of like, how are you, and we have templates, there's templates in the link. It is that cycle of, are you capturing their fears and frustrations? And it is this sort of iterative process of like, what do you think it is? And then going back and pressure testing that, and then using their actual words, right? Using the audience, the audience that you're gathering up, like their actual words and how they describe the problem. Because you're probably wrong, right? The way you frame it, like you're either think something's frustrating or they're afraid of it and you're wrong, or you just say it in a different way. You say it like in the sort of inside four walls kind of way, the way that your organization talks about it, but it's not the way that your prospects talk about it. And so you just sort of iterate over that. But it is 100% not the brand personas and like the stuff that's out there, the psychographic, like it is, that stuff is, it's not my jam.
And one thing that I would add, it's an iterative cycle, right? Like it's an iterative approach. You start with something and you constantly improve and iterate on that. And at some point, you find yourself in a place where there is less new information, right? So like there is a phase where you're learning a lot, and there is constantly new stuff that you're adding to the mix. And then at some point, you start solidifying that, and maybe you start adding 10, 20% additional new information. And so those are different phases that you go through in identifying the ICP and buyer persona, and kind of tell you where you are in that journey of accuracy.
And the key is obviously write it down, because the interesting thing is as your team grows, right? As your team grows, and if you don't incorporate it as a system, then it gets more and more diffused, and people just lose the thread. It's just, so write it down.
Dave, this was great. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to engage and connect with you, where can they find you?
They can. That's a really good question. I'm on LinkedIn. It's just D Shanley, Dave Shanley. You can find me there. You can always drop us a note at Content Camel. It's just dave@contentcamel.io. You can shoot me an email. Why not? And you'll find me on the water. I do a lot of sailing.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Armando.
Everyone that connected as well. That is all for today. Appreciate you spending some time with us.